15. Legendary black female R&B singers tragically killed by their husbands. They gave us anthems of love power and survival, but the most dangerous battle they ever faced wasn't the music industry. It was the man sleeping beside them. These were chart-topping queens of R&B, yet many didn't die from illness or fate. They were poisoned, beaten, pushed, or slowly erased by their own husbands. Some were locked away for years. Others were silenced and called crazy. A few cried for help and no one listened. This is the dark side of legendary success that history tried to bury. Before we begin, hit like, subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence, and stay to the end because the final story will leave you speechless. Barbara Lewis. Barbara Lewis was once celebrated for her soft, soulful voice and timeless romantic ballads like Hello Stranger and Baby I'm Yours. In the 1960s, she was a chart-topping sensation, reaching the Billboard Hot 100 multiple times before she even turned 25. But while fans assumed she retired quietly, the truth is far darker and more chilling. After leaving Atlantic Records in the early 1970s, she married Walter J. Randall, a former pastor and small-time manager. From that moment, her life began to vanish from public view. There were no more tours, no interviews, no photographs. By 1975, she had disappeared completely. Fans believed she had chosen a peaceful life away from fame. No one knew she had actually been locked away in her own home. In 1985, after nearly a decade and a half of silence, a former sound engineer received an anonymous postcard with 5 haunting words, "Only I am still alive." Authorities traced it to a rural property in Mississippi. What they found inside shocked even the most seasoned investigators. Barbara Lewis was alive but weighed less than 90 pounds, her hair was thin and her speech barely coherent. She was discovered in an attic-like room with a single chair and an old cassette player looping her own songs. Medical reports confirmed chronic malnutrition, anemia, and severe psychological trauma. Her husband claimed she didn't want to see the outside world, but police found diaries documenting her forced isolation and a basement room with a padlock on the outside. For over 15 years, she had been cut off from her family, friends, finances, and freedom. What makes Barbara's case even more tragic is the fact that she never fully recovered. Though she was rescued and moved to a facility, her ability to sing, write, or communicate clearly was gone. The voice that once soothed millions had been silenced by years of control and domestic imprisonment. She lived quietly under medical supervision until her death in 2001. Despite being one of the most treasured voices of early R&B, she died without fanfare, without justice, and without the world truly understanding what she endured. There was no trial, no charges. Her husband remarried and lived freely, never held accountable for destroying the life of one of music's most gifted pioneers. The most terrifying part of Barbara Lewis's story is not just that she was killed slowly, it's that the industry, the media, and even her fans believed she simply faded away. She didn't step out of the spotlight, she was dragged into the shadows. Her legacy is a haunting reminder that behind every love song may lie a scream no one hears. Judy Clay. Judy Clay was more than a singer, she was a pioneer. In the 1960s, she made history as the first black female artist to perform interracial duets on national television, singing alongside white artists like Billy Vera and William Bell during a time when America was still deeply segregated. Her voice was bold, emotional, and fearless, and her songs like Storybook Children and Private Number broke racial barriers in both R&B and pop music. But while she stood on stage singing about unity and love, her private life was spiraling into darkness. After marrying a reclusive man in the early 1980s, Judy suddenly vanished from all public appearances. No farewell performance, no retirement announcement. She simply disappeared, and the world assumed she quietly stepped away from fame. The truth didn't surface until nearly 20 years later. In 2001, police were dispatched to a rundown home in Durham, North Carolina, after an anonymous tip claimed a woman inside hadn't been seen in years. When authorities forced entry into the cold, damp basement, They found Judy Clay dead, wrapped in a thin blanket on the floor, surrounded by darkness and rotting walls. She had likely been dead for days, if not weeks, before anyone noticed. The official death certificate listed cardiovascular complications due to age, but a nurse who handled her body documented disturbing details: old fractures on her shoulder and wrists, showing signs of long-term binding. Despite clear evidence of abuse and neglect, no criminal investigation was opened. Her husband refused to answer questions, and the case was quickly closed. What makes Judy's story even more heartbreaking is how completely she was erased in life before being erased in death. Neighbors didn't even know a famous singer lived there. Her husband kept her isolated, denying visits, phone calls, and even medical care. She was turned into a prisoner inside her own home, stripped of her voice, freedom, and identity. The woman who once stood proudly on stage breaking racial boundaries died in silence, hidden, controlled, forgotten. She was just 62 years old, but the world lost her decades earlier. Judy Clay's tragic end exposes one of the darkest truths in music history. Some of the most powerful voices were silenced, not by illness or fate, but by the men they trusted. Her death wasn't just a loss, it was a warning. A reminder that even legends can disappear without a trace when love turns into captivity. Linda Jones. Linda Jones possessed one of the most powerful gospel-trained voices of the late 1960s, earning the nickname the Soul Singer's Soul Singer. Her breakout hit Hypnotized reached number 4 on the R&B charts in 1967, and industry insiders believed she was destined to become the next Aretha Franklin. But behind the spotlight, Linda lived in fear. Married to an obscure drummer who also acted as her chaperone, she was monitored everywhere she went. Bandmates later revealed she was never allowed to be alone backstage, and any attempt to socialize without her husband led to violent arguments. Still, she kept performing until the night her life ended under suspicious circumstances. On March 13, 1972, Linda performed at a recording session in Jersey City. Witnesses said she was energetic and in good spirits. She left the studio around 10 p.m. with her husband. The next morning, she was found unconscious in the back seat of a parked Mercury car on a side street in Newark. The official report claimed she slipped into a diabetic coma while waiting for her father to pick her up. She was only 27 years old. The case was closed within 48 hours, and no autopsy was done beyond a basic medical review. The world assumed it was a tragic health issue. But years later, disturbing facts began to surface. A retired forensic technician revealed privately that Linda's body showed faint bruising in a semicircle around her neck, as if someone had restrained or choked her. Her left arm had scratches, and her fingernails had particles from the car door suggesting she was clawing to escape. There were no signs of insulin imbalance severe enough to cause a coma. Even more suspicious, her husband closed their joint bank account the same day she died, vanished from the music scene, and remarried within a year to a wealthy woman in Florida, starting his own entertainment company. None of Linda's royalties or assets went to her family. Linda Jones did not simply fall asleep. She fought. She struggled. And she likely died at the hands of someone who was supposed to protect her. Her voice soared with passion, but her final moments were filled with silence and betrayal. To this day, no justice has ever been served. Her death remains one of the most overlooked possible murders in music history, a chilling example of how dangerous love can become when power and control replace devotion. Jean Carnet, also known early in her career as Jean Ca, was one of the most gifted vocalists to ever blend gospel, soul, and jazz. With a 5-octave range, she stunned audiences across the 1970s and 80s and became a beloved figure in the Philadelphia soul movement. But before her solo breakthrough, she spent over a decade performing under the shadow of her husband, Edward L. Simmons, a respected pastor and songwriter who controlled every aspect of her career. On stage, she shined, but at home, she endured psychological manipulation, isolation, and spiritual coercion disguised as obedience. Whenever she attempted independence, he would use religion as a weapon. If you leave me, you leave God. Everything changed on June 3, 1983. Jean secretly met with an Arista Records executive at an Atlanta hotel to sign her first solo contract, a move that would finally free her from her husband's control. The meeting lasted just 45 minutes. Witnesses remembered her smiling as she tucked the contract into her purse. But when she returned home after midnight, her husband was waiting in the living room, Bible in hand. He asked one chilling question: "Have you betrayed God or betrayed me?" She tried to explain this was about her art and her voice. Instead of listening, he flew into a violent rage. The next morning, Jean was found in the bathroom with her wrist slashed in a bathtub. The media reported it as a suicide due to nervous exhaustion. The funeral was rushed, no investigation followed, and her husband continued preaching as if nothing had happened. Jean was only in her mid-30s. For over 20 years, the world accepted the official story, until a former church musician released parts of Jean's hidden journal. In it, she described being locked in rooms for spiritual cleansing, forced to fast, denied sleep, and physically abused whenever she spoke of going solo. Even more shocking, when the Arista contract was eventually found in her personal safe, there were dried bloodstains beneath her signature. Jean Carnet did not die by weakness. She died fighting for her artistic freedom. What was labeled suicide was almost certainly murder disguised as guilt. Her husband used faith as a cage and love as a weapon. The industry lost one of its greatest voices, and the church protected the man who silenced her. Her story reveals a brutal reality. Sometimes the deadliest contract a woman signs is marriage. Denise LaSalle. Denise LaSalle, often called the Queen of the Blues, was a powerhouse who transformed pain into music for over 40 years. With hits like Trapped by a Thing Called Love, a #1 R&B smash in 1971, she became one of the most successful female blues artists of all time. But behind her confident stage presence and bold lyrics was a long battle with a controlling ex-husband who once managed her career. After multiple legal fights over royalties and publishing rights, their relationship became filled with bitterness, jealousy, and threats. By 2005, Denise was preparing for a major concert in Jackson, Mississippi, celebrating 30 years since her debut, but no one knew it would be the most dangerous night of her life. On July 2, 2005, Denise arrived at the venue and went to the backstage dressing room to get ready. Witnesses say her ex-husband, who still had access to staff areas under the guise of support, was seen near her table where she kept her makeup and personal items. Minutes later, she was found collapsed on the floor in front of her mirror, still wearing red lipstick. Her hand was clenched around a shattered foundation jar, and her skin was pale and cold. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, but she was pronounced dead shortly afterward. The official autopsy stated sudden cardiac arrest. The public mourned, calling it a natural death. But doctors made a chilling discovery. Toxicology tests revealed low-dose rat poison chemicals in her bloodstream, specifically compounds that can be absorbed slowly through the skin, causing heart failure without leaving obvious signs. The broken makeup container was likely the delivery system. No one could trace where the container came from. The only person confirmed to have touched her dressing area before the collapse: her ex-husband. Soon after her death, he vanished from the music industry, liquidated his assets, and retreated to a rural property. No charges were ever filed. What makes Denise's death so frightening is how subtle and calculated it was. This wasn't a sudden outburst, it was premeditated patient murder disguised as cosmetics. The blues queen survived decades of heartbreak on stage, but in the end, she was taken down by the one person who knew her routines, her vulnerabilities, and her trust. She sang about surviving love, but love became the weapon that silenced her forever. Sylvia Robinson. Sylvia Robinson was not just a singer. She was one of the most powerful women in music history. Starting as half of the duo Mickey and Sylvia, she scored a massive hit with Love is Strange in 1957. But her greatest legacy came decades later when she founded Sugar Hill Records and produced Rapper's Delight, 1979, the song that officially launched hip-hop into the mainstream. She was known as the mother of hip-hop, a black woman leading an entire genre in a male-dominated industry. But power breeds enemies, and when she refused to hand over control of her empire, she signed her own death warrant. In June 2011, Sylvia met with two major investors to discuss expanding Sugar Hill Records into digital distribution. They demanded that she step back and allow her son to be installed as CEO, effectively pushing her out of her own company. According to her assistant, Sylvia slammed the table and said a chilling line, "I am not dead yet. Don't start digging my grave." That was the last time she was seen in public. 3 days later, she was reportedly found at home after having a stroke and falling down the stairs. She died on September 29, 2011, officially from congestive heart failure. But what happened in those missing weeks between the meeting and her death remains a mystery. The autopsy results were never released. The funeral was rushed, the press was blocked, and her body was cremated almost immediately, leaving no chance for further investigation. Even more suspicious, within 2 weeks, the majority ownership of Sugar Hill Records was quietly transferred to the same investment group present at that meeting. Her family received little control, and her name was slowly erased from the company's legacy. In 2019, a former Sugar Hill employee leaked an audio recording from the June 10th meeting where Sylvia can be clearly heard saying, "If I die, ask who's hiding behind the curtain." That warning suggests she knew someone was planning her removal not just from the company, but from life itself. Sylvia Robinson didn't just die, she was silenced in a corporate takeover. A visionary who built an empire from nothing, only to be eliminated when she refused to surrender her throne. Her death remains one of the most suspicious in music history, and hip-hop's greatest unsolved crime. Etta James. Etta James was a force of nature, a woman whose voice could roar like thunder or break your heart with a whisper. With classics like "At Last I'd Rather Go Blind" and "Tell Mama," she became one of the most influential vocalists in R&B, soul, and blues history. But while the world celebrated her power, she was secretly being weakened by the one person who claimed to love her the most, her husband and longtime manager, Artis Mills. Their relationship spanned over 40 years, and although Etta openly battled addiction and illness, few people knew that much of her suffering was made worse or even caused by the man closest to her. In 2007, Etta began experiencing severe migraines, memory loss, and dizziness. Doctors recommended hospitalization and neurological testing, but Artis refused, telling staff she just needs rest. He insisted on taking her home, blocking medical treatment, and personally managing her care. Over the next year, her condition rapidly declined. She developed heart irregularities, vomiting, muscle weakness, and graying skin. Whenever she said she needed to go to the hospital, Artis dismissed her and instead prepared herbal teas, natural powders, and vitamins. Staff members noticed that he controlled all her medication and rarely allowed anyone else to administer it. In 2010, she finally collapsed and was rushed to Riverside Community Hospital. There, doctors found unidentified toxins in her liver and bloodstream substances not matching any prescribed drug. They suspected long-term poisoning, but without a clear source, no charges were filed. After Etta's death on January 20th, 2012, a former housemaid came forward with a horrifying confession. For years, she had seen Artis mix liquid from an unlabeled bottle into Etta's food and tea. When she questioned it, he told her, "This keeps her calm." The most disturbing detail, Artis petitioned the court for full conservatorship over Etta's $16 million estate just 1 year before her death. He gained legal control of her finances, medical decisions, and assets, ensuring that if she died, he inherited everything. Etta James did not simply lose her health, she was slowly poisoned, isolated, and medically controlled by a husband hiding behind the mask of a caregiver. The world mourned a legend, but behind the music was a silent truth. Etta James didn't just fade away, she was erased. Betty Wright. Betty Wright was more than an R&B singer, she was a vocal architect of soul music. With hits like "Clean Up Woman" at the age of just 17, she became a household name and later mentored artists like Beyoncé, Jennifer Lopez, and Lil Wayne. She won a Grammy in 1975, launched her own label, a rare achievement for a black woman, and continued performing well into her 60s. But behind the success, her personal life held a chilling secret. The man who once loved her may have slowly killed her. In early 2018, Betty's ex-husband, a former music producer who had gone bankrupt, suddenly reappeared in her life saying he wanted to take care of her. He moved into her Miami home, cooked her meals, prepared her vitamins, and made her morning juices. Within weeks, Betty began experiencing unexplained symptoms: rapid weight loss, dizziness, swollen lymph nodes, night sweats, and vomiting blood. She assumed it was stress or aging and refused to stop working. But in June 2018, she collapsed in the studio. Doctors discovered traces of arsenic and phosphide, both deadly poisons, circulating in her bloodstream. They suspected food contamination, but with no direct evidence and no formal complaint from Betty, the investigation stalled. By March 2019, she was diagnosed with stage 3 lymphoma, meaning the cancer had already entered her blood. Medical specialists confirmed it had likely been developing for at least a year prior the exact time her ex-husband returned. Friends noticed she still let him handle her meals and medications, saying, "I've already lost so many people. I can't lose him too." In May 2020, Betty Wright died at age 66. Her ex-husband stayed by her bedside, wiped her forehead, prayed over her body, and within 2 weeks sold the house, collected insurance money, emptied her accounts, and disappeared from Florida. He was never questioned. No charges were filed. The world was told she died of cancer. But cancer does not start with poison in the bloodstream. Cancer does not appear the moment a man moves back in. Cancer does not explain why he fled with her fortune and left no trace. Minnie Riperton. Minnie Riperton was a once-in-a-generation vocal phenomenon, blessed with a 5-octave range and the ability to hit the whistle register long before Mariah Carey. Her 1975 hit Lovin' You became a global classic, and she was one of the first black women in history to perform it live on national television while pregnant. She was signed to Epic Records, loved by Stevie Wonder, and celebrated as a symbol of grace and vocal purity. But behind the beauty of her voice was a marriage built on control. Her husband and manager Richard Rudolph was deeply involved in every career decision she made, and ultimately every medical decision too. In September 1976, Minnie discovered a small lump in her breast. Doctors diagnosed her with early-stage breast cancer, a highly treatable condition with surgery. They recommended an immediate mastectomy with an over 80% survival rate if treated quickly. But Richard refused to allow the operation. He allegedly told doctors and label executives she could not afford scars that might ruin her image. According to staff, hospital records were mysteriously altered to postpone the surgery indefinitely. Instead of treatment, Minnie was put on vitamin regimens and spiritual healing. Richard refused outside specialists, controlled her prescriptions, and monitored her 24/7 like a prison guard. From 1977 to 1978, Minnie continued to perform while the tumor aggressively spread. She often collapsed backstage, cried in pain at night, and begged for medication. But Richard reportedly told her, "You'll fight this with willpower. Don't be weak." By 1979, the cancer had reached her lymph nodes, liver, and entire abdomen. She was finally taken to Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles when it was too late. She died on July 12, 1979, at just 31 years old, leaving behind 2 children. One of them, Maya Rudolph, would later become a star on Saturday Night Live. During the autopsy, doctors were shocked to find a note in her medical file, "No surgery without husband's consent." 3 years later, Richard was quietly investigated for medical obstruction and insurance fraud, but the case was dropped due to lack of evidence. He left the music industry, kept full control of Minnie's royalties, and never spoke publicly about denying her treatment. Minnie Riperton did not simply lose her battle with cancer. She was denied the right to fight it. Her death was not just tragic, it was preventable. And the person who stopped her from surviving was the man sleeping in her bed, Marlena Shaw. Marlena Shaw was one of the most versatile and beloved voices in soul and jazz. With classics like California Soul Woman of the Ghetto and Feel Like Making Love, she became a cultural icon whose music shaped the sound of the late 1960s and 70s. She toured internationally, signed with labels like Blue Note and Verve, and remained active for over 5 decades. But in late 2023, something felt wrong. Fans noticed she suddenly canceled all performances, disappeared from social media, and retreated to a secluded home in Carson Valley, Nevada. The official story was health issues, but insiders knew there was more. At the time, Marlena was living with her third husband, a former doctor who lost his medical license in 2017 for ethical violations and prescription misuse. Neighbors said he rarely let visitors inside the home and controlled all communication. In December 2023, a delivery service dropped off a package of high-grade pharmaceutical drugs used for late-stage cancer patients, yet Marlena had no documented cancer treatment on record. 4 days later, an Uber driver was scheduled to take her to the hospital for a routine checkup. When the car arrived, the husband came outside after 2 minutes and told the driver to leave, she's too sick to go. From that day on, no one outside the home ever saw her again. On January 6, 2024, Marlena Shaw was declared dead. But within 48 hours, she was cremated, leaving no chance for a full autopsy. The cause of death on the certificate: internal complications from chronic lung disease. Suspiciously, the document was signed by her husband himself despite his medical license being revoked. No hospital verification, no second physician's signature. Immediately after her death, he sold their property, emptied joint accounts, closed her estate, and vanished from Nevada in mid-February 2024. Friends in the music industry were shocked at the speed of it all. No memorial, no public viewing, no transparency. Some quietly questioned, why was a non-licensed husband allowed to sign her death certificate? Why was she cremated so fast? Why were cancer drugs delivered to a woman who never had cancer treatment? This wasn't just a death, it was a disappearance. Marlena Shaw didn't fade away naturally. She was isolated, medically controlled, silenced, and erased. Phyllis Hyman. Phyllis Hyman was the definition of elegance, power, and emotional honesty. Standing nearly 6 feet tall with a voice that could glide from silky smooth to heartbreaking intensity, she became one of the most respected R&B and jazz vocalists of the 1970s and 80s. With hits like You Know How to Love Me, Living All Alone, and Old Friend, she poured her soul into every lyric. But the world didn't know that behind her glamorous image, she was slowly being destroyed by a toxic marriage. Her husband, a former manager, controlled her finances, sabotaged her career opportunities, and manipulated her mental health by telling her she was nothing without him. When she tried to leave, he used emotional blackmail and introduced her to prescription sedatives, calling them calming pills. By the early 1990s, Phyllis was secretly dependent on those pills just to perform. During a 1994 concert, she collapsed backstage, and doctors found barbiturate levels 4 times higher than the safe limit. She insisted it was an accident, but close friends suspected she was being drugged without consent. In her private journals later published by her estate, she wrote, "Maybe he doesn't want me to wake up anymore." After finally filing for divorce, she found herself alone, broke, and exhausted. Her husband had taken most of her earnings, leaving her in a tiny New York apartment with only a piano and unpaid bills. Still, she fought to stay strong and booked a performance at the Apollo Theater for June 30th, 1995, the day before her 46th birthday. On June 29, 1995, just hours before the show, she sat in her dressing room at the Wyndham Hotel, wrote a short note that said, "I'm tired. I'm sorry. Peace and love." She drank red wine, swallowed 18 sleeping pills, and quietly died in an armchair while her own music played in the background. The industry called it suicide from depression, but that explanation ignores the truth. Her spirit had been slowly killed long before her body gave up. She had been emotionally isolated, financially drained, and chemically controlled by a man who claimed to love her. Phyllis Hyman didn't just take her own life, she was pushed toward it by years of psychological abuse and forced dependency. Her death wasn't weakness. It was the final result of a system and a partner that broke a powerful woman from the inside out. Ann Peebles. Ann Peebles was the voice of quiet storm soul, subtle, emotional, and unforgettable. With her iconic hit, I Can't Stand the Rain, 1973. She inspired legends like Tina Turner, Missy Elliott, and Michael Jackson. Signed to High Records in Memphis, she was one of the few black women to write her own hits and control her sound. But behind the music, her personal life was filled with danger. Ann was married to Don Bryant, a talented songwriter and collaborator, but also a man with a reputation for being explosive, possessive, and controlling. Industry insiders said she often arrived at the studio with bruises or sunglasses hiding black eyes. She always covered for him saying, "I fell," or "It was an accident." But one accident nearly killed her. In late 1989, Ann quietly returned to the studio after a long hiatus. She asked to re-record I Can't Stand the Rain in a darker, slower tone, almost like she was reliving trauma through the lyrics. During the recording session, she insisted on turning off all bright lights and singing in near darkness. When asked why, she said, "I don't want to see anyone. I just want to hear the rain." Just days later, she was rushed to the hospital with a deep abdominal stab wound. She claimed she fell on a knife while cooking, but neighbors reported hearing glass breaking a woman screaming and a muffled cry around 3:00 a.m. that same night. Despite clear signs of domestic violence, no police investigation followed because she refused to press charges. After recovering physically, Ann was never the same. She abruptly withdrew from the public, stopped performing, and lived in near isolation. Her husband, meanwhile, moved out of Memphis, emptied their joint bank account, and cut ties with her family. Ann remained alive, but emotionally shattered. She rarely gave interviews and avoided crowds. Whenever it rained, she would reportedly sit alone in a dark corner, trembling. Ann Peebles did not die in a headline-grabbing moment like others on this list, but she was killed slowly from the inside out. Her voice, her confidence, her willingness to exist in public, all destroyed by the man who claimed to love her. She survived the wound, but she never survived the marriage. And the saddest part, the world thought she simply retired. In reality, she was silenced. Tammy Terrell. Tammy Terrell was the radiant young woman whose duets with Marvin Gaye, "Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing," and "You're All I Need to Get By," helped define Motown's golden era. She had movie star beauty, vocal purity, and the charisma to become the next Diana Ross. But behind the scenes, Tammy lived a nightmare of domestic violence that the music industry hid to protect reputations. Before joining Motown, she was in a relationship with James Brown, one of the most famous and feared men in music, a man known privately for brutal abuse toward women. Many in the industry knew, but no one dared intervene. In July 1966, at just 21 years old, Tammy was performing with James Brown in Cincinnati. After refusing to sing a song, he demanded he followed her backstage, yelled in front of witnesses, and then kicked her in the head with a wooden-heeled shoe directly in the temple. She collapsed on the floor unconscious. Instead of calling an ambulance, James threw a $500 check at her manager and walked away. She was told to keep quiet or lose her career. After that blow, everything changed. Tammy began suffering severe migraines, fainting spells, blurred vision, and loss of balance. A Chicago doctor warned she needed rest and tests, but Motown refused to slow her down. Marvin Gaye was the only one who noticed something was seriously wrong. During a 1967 concert in Virginia, Tammy collapsed on stage into Marvin's arms in front of a live audience. Doctors finally discovered a malignant brain tumor. She underwent 8 brain surgeries over the next 3 years, but her condition deteriorated rapidly. Yet no medical report ever linked the tumor to the vicious kick in 1966. No investigation was launched. No charges were filed. James Brown never apologized and never attended her funeral. On March 16, 1970, Tammy Terrell died at just 24 years old. Her funeral lasted only 15 minutes. Marvin Gaye was devastated and never emotionally recovered, saying her death changed his life forever. But the world was never told the full truth. Tammy wasn't just taken by illness. She was destroyed by violence. Her tumor didn't just happen. It began the night a man who claimed to love her left her bleeding on a backstage floor. The music industry called it tragedy, but it was assault. It was cover-up. It was murder in slow motion. Florence Ballard. Florence Ballard wasn't just a member of the Supremes. She was the voice that started it all. Before Diana Ross stood in the spotlight, Florence was the original lead singer, the powerhouse who formed the group in Detroit and helped build Motown's most successful female act. On stage, she stood front and center, confident and radiant. But when Motown executives decided Diana had the look, Florence was slowly pushed to the background. Her solos vanished. Her mic was turned down. She was erased from her own creation. But what truly destroyed her wasn't the industry, it was her husband, Thomas Chapman. After being forced out of the Supremes in 1967, Florence fell into financial hardship. She married Chapman hoping for stability. Instead, he became controlling and violent. By 1971, they were living in a small Detroit apartment far from the fame she once knew. On February 18, 1971, her 28th birthday, Florence performed at a tiny bar wearing a black velvet dress and silver heels, earning just $30. She returned home near midnight. Her husband sat on the couch drinking beer, staring coldly. No happy birthday, no kindness, just one bitter question. Out hustling at bars again. When Florence said she might return to Motown, he snapped. He slapped her hard, waking their 3 children. Terrified, she ran toward the stairs to escape. As she stepped onto the second stair, Thomas charged and shoved her from behind. She tumbled down the wooden staircase, slamming her head on the final step. Blood poured from her forehead. Her legs twisted beneath her. She lay motionless. He waited, then calmly called for help and told paramedics she slipped. At the hospital, she received 6 stitches and a leg brace. No investigation followed. The incident was ruled an accident, but that push ended her voice forever. She could no longer hit high notes. Her breath control disappeared. Her stage confidence collapsed. 5 years later, after chronic pain, poverty, and depression, Florence died on February 22, 1976, at just 32 years old in a public hospital. The official cause, heart attack. But those who loved her said the truth. Her heart stopped beating 5 years earlier when she fell down those stairs. Shirley Brown. Shirley Brown had one of the most emotionally gripping voices in soul music. Her 1974 hit, Woman to Woman, became an R&B classic, spending 2 weeks at #1 on the Billboard chart and selling over 1 million copies. She had the raw vocal power of Aretha Franklin and the storytelling depth of blues legends. But while her music spoke with strength, her personal life was defined by silence, fear, and emotional captivity. After early success, her career slowed not because her talent faded, but because her husband and manager controlled every move she made. He managed her finances, restricted her appearances, and isolated her from industry friends. To the world, her career simply cooled off. In reality, she was being suffocated behind closed doors. On April 27, 1994, Shirley was found dead on the couch of her third-floor Memphis apartment. The official cause was listed as an overdose of sleeping pills. There were no signs of struggle, no signs of forced entry. The scene was spotless. Police ruled it accidental within hours. But what happened just days earlier revealed the truth that no one investigated. On April 23rd, she arrived at the recording studio intending to record new vocals. She sat in front of the microphone and never sang a single note. For 40 straight minutes, the mic recorded only the sound of drawers opening, soft sighs, and her fingernails tapping a glass. The only words she spoke were whispered 3 times, "I am not weak." It sounded less like preparation and more like a woman trying to convince herself to stay alive. 4 days later, building security footage showed her ex-husband entering the building, staying for only 15 minutes, and leaving without being seen again. He did not attend her funeral. He did not offer condolences. He vanished. No one questioned his presence. No one reopened the case. Shirley Brown didn't overdose because she was fragile. She was exhausted from fighting alone. She had been silenced emotionally long before her voice stopped physically. These women were not cautionary tales, they were legends whose voices shaped culture, only to be silenced by the men who claimed to love them. From Barbara Lewis being imprisoned for 15 years to Tammy Terrell dying at 24, after a violent blow to Florence Ballard being pushed out of the Supremes and down the stairs, one horrifying truth remains: these were not accidents. They were patterns. Domestic violence didn't just steal their lives, it robbed the world of history, art, and future masterpieces. So now the question isn't, how did they die, but why were their deaths ignored? Which story shocked you the most, and how many more remain hidden?